The different courts all over the country obviously are along the lines of family issues. We have women who are having issues along the lines of estate management. You have widows and daughters who are unable to access property that may be rightly inherited from their spouses or from their fathers. We have women who are facing issues, one of the biggest issues being gender-based violence. In any particular court you go to, you'll find cases. And I think recently we had a program being launched, which is called Justice for How. It was launched by the UN Women and the Australian government with a major focus of trying to support women who are having challenges accessing justice along the lines of gender-based violence. So right now the statistics reflect that for a case which is a gender-based violence case to be heard, you need about 919 days. And keeping in mind our understanding that justice is not a building, it's a service. The right to timely justice it's not just a privilege, it's a right. For someone to wait for 919 days to have a decision or to have justice in a case which is, for instance, gender-based violence is definitely a challenge that we must discuss and we must be able to address creatively. And that's why one of our focus points for this discussion is to understand from our hosts, from Madame Prima Kwagala and Madame Linda, is how can we address this issue? How can we better support women all over the country to access justice, and how can we remove these hindrances that are affecting women's ability to access justice in a timely and reasonable way? I think another thing we want to address is the issue of sexual harassment in workplaces. I think that's another unique challenge that affects women all over the country. We have women who, when you look at most of the cases which are relating to sexual harassment, they uniquely affect women. When you look at issues which are relating to land matters all over the country, they uniquely affect women. When you look at issues relating to estate management, they uniquely affect women. So our conversation today should be centered around that, and I would like to invite Mr. Ellison Karuhanga to briefly give us the profiles of Ms. Prima Kwagala and Ms. Linda before we get into the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much, Mercy. We are honored today to be having Prima Kwagala and Linda Alinda Ikanza. These are not just two of the finest female lawyers in Uganda. These are two of the finest lawyers in Uganda. They have a deep understanding of legal practice. They have an incredibly strong reputation as lawyers, as leaders of the legal profession, as mentors of the younger generation of lawyers. Prima is one of the most formidable voices in this country for justice and for equity. She is a human rights lawyer by training and by orientation. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the Women's Pro Bono Initiative. She's a Makerere University alumni, Columbia University alumni. She's from Victoria. She's just at another level when it comes to this business of justice. She's passionate about the causes of women and the causes of justice. At one time, if I recall, or maybe even now, I don't know if it is now, she was the chairperson of the Female Lawyers Committee of the Uganda Law Society. She's been named one of the women of courage. She has innovated things for human trafficking cases, land cases, gender violence cases. If you ever visit Luzira Women's Prison and you just turn the visitor's book, you'll find her name on every page. As a guest, I don't know how many people she visits and pushes the rights of. So first of all, we are very, very happy to have you, Prima, and good evening to you.
Everyone listening in today, it's really an honor to be in this space, knowing the background of the speakers you bring onto the space. I really feel honored to be here today to share my thoughts on the space. So forward to the next 1 hour or 2 or more. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is none other than the indefatigable Linda Alinda Ikanza, famously known as Nalongo in legal circles, but she's also actually Nalongo, for real. She is a legal powerhouse by any description. She has done innovation. She has an app. She has a legal app. She has done innovation. She does teaching. She's one of the foremost teachers of law, of not just students at LDC, but lawyers in practice with her trial advocacy program. She's an experienced commercial litigator. I have recently been against her in court. She's horrible while there. She's a fantastic fighter for the cause of her clients. She is, I think she also does moots at LDC. She has trained hundreds upon hundreds of lawyers in courtroom skills, in litigation, and she's a fierce litigator, a partner currently at Amber Advocates, a respected trial lawyer, a legal giant by any and every description. So we are really honored to have you here, Linda, as a titan of our profession, as a leader in our profession. I don't like to call our guests today female leaders, because any lawyer worth his salt will agree that our guests are leaders of lawyers of all genders. And so, Linda, you are most welcome, and thank you for being with us now, Longo.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for continuing.
You're not on. For me, you're not on. I think log off and log on again. Okay, I think we're having trouble getting Linda, but as you're coming on, Linda, I think we'll kick straight into it. We'll kick straight into it with this conversation. Today's conversation is going to focus on the weight of backlog in women. Now, the weight of backlog on women, and why this is important is because, like we've been saying, we have a serious crisis of backlog, and on top of having a serious crisis of backlog, we have a constitutional solution in Article 142, Clause 2 of the Constitution. And I want to start with actually with Linda. Are you on? Maybe Linda, welcome to the space formally, and
Can you hear me now?
You are still listening. You accept the speaker invite. I sent you an invite to speak.
Was the speaker just a few minutes ago?
you had come on.
Can you hear me now? Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to have this.
No, you're on. Speak.
Should I just use your phone when I speak?
Okay.
You are now a speaker.
Yeah, you can hear me now.
Yes.
Yes, I was saying that on a personal note, I want to thank you guys for continuing to have these important conversations. I think the bad luck of an indefinite campaign season has given us the blessing of introspect and deeper reflection on challenges that we usually gloss over, and it's such an important season that we are in. So
Let me ask.
So to be able to have these conversations, I think is important for the bar particularly. Many times we have other sectors in the in the justice system retrospect. And as the bar, we're usually bystanders and usually only contributors to the complaining and never the solutions. So I really look forward to our conversation this evening because I think that we're dwelling on solutions, which is a contribution we need to make.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for that. I think maybe we'll start with Prima. I think before we get into this conversation that we need to have, and I agree with you, we are actually trying to look for solutions and to have a conversation. But maybe before we do that, Prima, maybe if you could just tell the people who have come to listen to us, if you could just tell us about Prima Kwagala. What drew you to the law? What inspires you? What made you a person interested in women's rights and out there fighting every day, forming a women's pro bono initiative? And tell us about you, tell us about the Women's Pro Bono Initiative and just what you do very briefly.
Those are too many questions in one, Elson. But briefly, my name is Prima Kwagala. Prima means first and Kwagala means love. In a nutshell, first love. I'm a firstborn between my parents of 7 girls, 1 boy. And for the longest time in our family, my mom was looking for a boy. So every other year I came back. I was in boarding school from a very young age. My mom was pregnant. And at some point I was like, hey, but when will this come to an end? She was looking for a son. Yeah. So, the struggle for why she wouldn't.
No, I think it's better now.
As a woman, it didn't seem like it was enough for my mom to have her place in her marriage when she had us daughters. At one point, we were 5 girls, and my dad was the only man that came into the home. And that seemed to be, it didn't seem to bother him, but for my mom, I think the community and societal pressures were like, you must have a son. There were so many people offering her medications. There were people, asking her to visit their shrines. The pastors were not giving her a break with endless fasts, because my mom used to have a bit of, they say, diseases or family didn't seem cemented until she had a son. So for me, from a very young age, I felt like, but you're married. Why is it not enough that you're married and you have 2 of us women or 3 or 5? You really hope that one day you will get a son. And unfortunately for us at some point, and my story is really online for those that might want to explore it more, you can just Google my name, you will come across my podcast or my moth sharings or stories as I write monologues about why we founded the Women's Pro Bono Initiative. At some point in my family, the extended family supported my dad to get a second wife to give him a son, and my mom was driven out of her marital home. And as a young girl, I witnessed that and how brutal it was for my mom and mentally traumatizing. She was not driven out alone, she was driven out with her daughters. We had to pack our bags and leave. I think we were consuming food for nothing. And we left, and my mom couldn't stop crying about the contributions she had made to his life, to his family, construction of that home. And growing up, I think the only desire I had was to help my mom one day get justice. But being a born-again Christian, I don't think and for my mom, she looked for vengeance. So what she really all her life to look to a day she would forgive my dad and move on and rebuild her life. Yeah, so as a young girl growing, even through school, I think I was looking for fulfillment of thing that would help me support my mom to get access. And it's not just to similar things. For those, I know that in my family there are women who are unable to give birth, and many of them are driven out because they cannot stay in this home, so this person can find the right who can give. Uncles who are married to BSc. When it comes to owning land, it is dads and my brothers who have access to that land. Be mine. And I'm aware of what the Constitution says, but I know that even in my practice as a lawyer, the practice is quite yeah, this is on a daily basis in my court practice. Reason when I'm visiting women in my office, which I found it really basically from these problems that I have experienced at a personal level, but what I see in the community, how we experience the law when we get into the courtrooms or that, and our day-to-day lives. There's a lot of injustice and an unfairness and lots of gendered lenses we need to be looking at. And as my sister Linda mentions, that today we're talking about solutions. I would like to hear really on what, but Elton, I don't know if I about myself and why we founded the Women's Pro Bono Union to provide legal aid or legal services. To actually bring it forward to back them up to access a lawyer that can serve them. And our office is that place you can phone a toll-free line, so you can speak to a lawyer free of charge in case you need to speak to one when you're being thrown out of your home or your children are being taken away or you're going through a bad divorce. You can just call our office and speak to a lawyer and get free legal advice. If you need someone to stand with you in office, we have lots of women lawyers that are in our office and some that have offered free hours to just be able to come and commit and stand with you in court for that case. We also represent you. We do strategic cases as well. We have challenged the laws, policies, times, practices that affect or have negative impact on women and girls in our society. So very briefly, without taking too much time away from Linda, that is what we do and why I do it. Thank you, and over to you, Elson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prima. I think everyone now knows exactly why we wanted you to be on this space. That the passion and energy and knowledge and experience, personal experience and work experience that you bring to this subject is absolutely admirable. I've actually watched that clip that you're telling people to see on the internet, and I think it's really worth a watch. But now let me turn to you, Linda. And really the similar question before we dig into our backlog discussion. Tell us about Nalongo Linda Alinda Ikanza. What makes her tick? What makes her the legal giant that she is in our practice? No, you're on. Mute.
I wear many hats, but I think that I will concentrate on who I am or my journey into legal practice. First, I had the sheer blessing with the practice of law, having been raised in a household. I think that I view the law from its long-term and generational issues. I don't usually have the hangover of never having seen someone live their entire life as a lawyer and seen its impact on their family, on their children, and on their broader social responsibilities. So I was raised in a household where my grandfather and father were lawyers. And after our father died, my mother faced injustices that saw us driven out of the home that we had been raised in, calling home. And I recall I was at LDC at the time, and my mom could not afford lawyers. And we would get thrown out in the morning, and my task as the lawyer in the house was to always come back with interim orders that could enable the police and the LC and the whole supportive system that knew that we were entitled to be in that house to support us to get back in legally. And I think that for me, that was the baptism by fire that led me to litigation, to many of many of the journeys that I have ended up in legal practice. So I started out in private practice and then moved to the corporate world. And it was in the corporate world when I felt that my love for litigation was drying up, and I started teaching. And then teaching opened me to a whole new door. I've been teaching since 2011, and I've had the blessing of interacting with lawyers from different jurisdictions, from different walks of life, from lawyers that are senior to me, that I train as in their advocacy skills, which usually is deeply humbling because it keeps you real and authentic. And then I went to LDC, where I've been teaching the last 11 years. And I think that a lot of the other things that I have ended up doing, for example, the app, always comes from my realization of how much my life is different as a female lawyer from men. So when the weight of whether social duties or family obligations comes upon us, it reminds you of how indispensable you are as a human being. And for me, I have found in technology the solution to expand and remove the limitations you have as a human being that can help you dispense justice to many more people than you could ever have. It's almost the same reason I teach, because I find that when you equip other people with skills, they will go out there and live out their full potential as litigators and bring justice to places you would never have been, but which you definitely have a passion for. So in a nutshell, that's me. And I think that one of the things that has really driven me to justice for women is ending up as a mother of only daughters. And I think that is something I'm always constantly talking about. I really wanted boys. I was a tomboy growing up. I ended up with only girls. And then I realized girls are actually really, really special, and yet the world is not that friendly to them. So I think that also my journey raising girls has forced me to address the structured injustices that I want to be able to look my daughters in the face if they end up as lawyers, which I hope, God forbid, they don't. If they end up as lawyers, I want to be able to say to them, I did this and I did that, because I know for sure they will hold me to account.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Linda. And I think this is really a good point for us to get into the conversation. And maybe I'll start with you, actually, Linda. And I think what everyone can hear from both of you is leaders, people who see problems and think solutions. From your vantage point as a legal practitioner, Linda, what does backlog look like in practice, and what's its effect on women?
So when you think backlog, you think about like a traffic jam. You think about something that freezes you in your tracks when time is still moving. That's what really backlog is. It's a huge traffic jam of cases. Have you ever sat in that long jam where you start to think, how can I get out? This morning. This morning, I'm sure all of you were thinking, what do I do? Do I abandon this car? Can I swim? Case backlog is exactly that for cases. And if there is anything that is very real for us as women, it's our human biological clocks. I'm telling you, they tick. They tick non-stop, unlike men. I remember very vividly being a young lawyer in 2009, feeling so lost in some Chaco case that I was defending in Mengo court. Desperately trying to get pregnant because I had been 1 year into marriage. But knowing that if this case gets another adjournment, I am not willing to come back to this court pregnant, because I don't want to find myself giving birth in a courtroom or going through my biological issues on top of a case that is not ending. So if there is a clock that cannot, for us as women, when we interact with the practice of law, our clocks are still ticking, and you find yourself having to make so many decisions, family decisions, client decisions, business decisions, on how you get to the destination you needed to get to quickly. So backlog, in addition to, I'll speak as a practitioner first, because there is, I think that Prima will speak a lot more for the women and how they interact with justice as clients and what it does to them from the whole angle of whether it is gender-based violence and how women are forced to remain longer in very toxic and dangerous situations because maybe the house they are living in actually does not belong to them. And if they leave, that's it. Whatever title or whatever interest that is documented is not in their name, and only their physical presence can keep or secure that interest they have. So you think about what backlog does to someone like that, and then you shift it to me as a practitioner who is that person's lawyer. And you see that female lawyers now avoid litigation. I know so many female lawyers in private practice for whom litigation, it means I'm referring that case to a young man, or I'm hiring young men to go and deal with that. And then you find that then that removes women from a lot of the litigation panels, and yet we bring a unique sense and a unique lens through which we see disputes. And then you think about how many, one of the reasons why I teach litigation skills is because I've found so many women that will settle a case at a loss, if I may say, just because they don't want to go through the whole horrendous, whether it is being belittled by the male chauvinism in the courtroom, or whether it is the sexual harassment, both from the bar or the bench or the client. They will take the quickest route out of that dispute. And many times that quickest route is not the best route for the client. It's not the best result that the client should have been entitled to. And then you think about things like how they control their interaction with courts. I know, and I have to speak in as real or as shall I say, raw as possible. I know so many female lawyers who will, in how they pick when they go to court, try to figure out the best part of a month. Because for us as women, we don't have a clean, 30 days every month that is uninterrupted by our biological clocks. So you know that most of our courtrooms don't have functional bathrooms, don't have restrooms that you can call decent at any level. And for us, it will actually become very important that I don't find myself in a courtroom where I need a working bathroom at that time of my month, because then I am going to counsel on the opposite side, who is a man, is going to be thinking about cross-examination. I'm going to be thinking about how I get out of that courtroom without embarrassing myself. And those are real. I don't think many people realize how much that then stifles the shall I say, scales from where we operate. Yeah. So I can't remember what question I was answering, but I think that for as long as you cannot predict how long a case will take, for as long as it is normal that a case can take 5 years, and that is in fact first you are lucky. No. Justice will keep pushing the women to the sidelines, both as clients and as practitioners. Case will take.
Thank you so much, Linda. And justice will keep pushing the women to the sidelines, both as clients and as practitioners. And I want now to take the conversation to Prima on that particular point. And the question I wanted to ask you is how backlog affects gender cases. But what I want you to do, Prima, is really to give us these human life stories, the stories that Prima Kwagala and the Women's Pro Bono Initiative interact with every day, so we can see what the impact is now on the women in the society, on the men in the society that you help. If you could just go away with it, Prima. The Women's Pro Bono Initiative interact with every day, so we can see what the impact is now. Yes, it is. On the women in the society. Help. If you could just.
Thank you, Elson. Yeah, I hope my mic is on.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I can attest that backlogs in the justice system have a very disproportionate impact on vulnerable women. If you consider cases of sex gender-based violence, questions of like rape, in cases of backlog, the common saying is delayed justice is justice denied. When we take long to hear cases of rape, it causes further trauma and stress for survivors. I have, for instance, handled a case of rape, which was filed, I think, in 2018. And to this date, judges keep changing, and every time we go with a new judge, we have to go through the trial again, to the extent that we have to support some of our clients with the psychosocial support for them to be able to stand these trials, because having to be cross-examined by different prosecutors year after year, hoping that one day this person will be brought to book, is really painful. And if you look at the statistics in our country, even though sexual violence cases are the most reported cases at any given point or time in this country, less than 1% are prosecuted to conclusion. For instance, last year more than 13,000 cases were recorded. If you look at our police crime report annually, more than 13,000 are sexual violence cases. Now, less than 1% of those is almost less than 10. 13,000 girls come forward and say, I was raped by my brother, I was raped by my uncle, I was raped by a teacher, I was raped by this person. There is evidence. Police takes them through the traumatizing process of, collecting their knickers, spreading their legs, taking swabs, taking DNA. Sometimes even they get pregnant through the whole process. And if you ever want to get justice or to see those cases prosecuted to conclusion, it could take you up to 7 years. Now imagine having to go to retell your trauma to the public. Many women will just give up. And this is because of, again, backlog. Evidence gets lost, because even these police officers that collect the evidence, they get changed from time to time. So next time you find the person, the storekeeper, when they say, where is the Nika? Can you please exhibit 1? The exhibit is not there. And you know the rules of evidence. In criminal trials, you must prove your case beyond reasonable doubt. In the absence of the Nika, it is her word against his word, because this is a case that was committed in the absence of not so much, people are not always there to witness these things. So the medical evidence, if it is not there, if it's not apparent, if doctors moved on, they went, out of the country for greener pastures, you have lost the case, and therefore no justice for the women that come forward. So many women lose interest in some of these cases. Sometimes we have to support them, encourage them, come forward, but even us as activists and people who want to support them to achieve these, it becomes so burdensome for us. Then it encourages perpetuator impunity, because someone knows that even if I do something and you go to court, when will they ever bring me up for trial? The cases are way too many. So perpetrators are emboldened to act with impunity, because they know that they will go to court, they will be in prison for a small time, be out, and they are out here again hounding you because you did not achieve justice. And why did you not achieve justice? Backlog. There are no judicial officers, or they are being shifted from time to time, and criminal sessions only come periodically throughout the year. That's a big problem for women, and they lose hope in the whole judicial process. When it comes to that dispute, a nightmare, as I mentioned in my introduction. Even though I know I have represented members of parliament, everyone here, and she's here having maybe a marital problem, you know.
Buy land, it is Mr. Karuhanga who has bought the land, even when the money is her hard-earned money. So when they come to court and say, really you can see that the salary of this account is coming from Parliament, and I am the member of Parliament, and the person that is dispensing and disposing of the money is not the person before the court. And on the face of it, the title is in the name of the man. Even the court says that is the person that owns the land. For us, when we go through and say
The money.
system, because we have many women would like to vote, because delays can lead to loss of their votes. If let's say we are not talking about women in parliament, even lawyers, women in the villages, see like the mom I was talking about. She has no land, she got married, she was given away, and we know that in our community once you get married, people even have a bed anymore. You have gone, you have nothing with your parents. Now you have fallen out with your husband. Livelihood lost, you have nowhere to farm, you have nowhere to sleep. I am handling a case of a woman in her 70s. She has just decided to flee this country because recently she fell out. Not recently, like 3 years ago, we have been in family court. She fell out with her husband and she said, I'm fed up of the domestic violence, and I came to this realization when my daughter was getting married. My husband has been beating me for the past 50 years. And when I saw my daughter getting married, I said to myself, my daughter is going to suffer the same violence. And when she comes to me for comfort, what am I going to be telling her? I cannot stand to look into her face and say, endure, because I endured. No, Miss.
I said to myself, my daughter is going to suffer the same violence. And when she comes to me for comfort, what am I going to be telling her? I cannot stand to look into her face and say, endure because I endured. No, Miss Kwagala. I want justice. We have demanded for justice from 3 different judges.
She cannot go back to her parents in Bushe to ask for land. Her father is in 90.
Counsel and say, the only thing my client wants is a home at the age of 70. She cannot go back to her parents in Bushenyi to ask for land. Her father is in 90s. He even doesn't have land. He sold most of it. How does she start her life at 70 after being married? You. Yes, she got into this marriage when she was 19. 70, the husband is saying, it's you who wants to leave. You have children, we have grandchildren. You're now saying you want divorce. What kind of woman are you? Many times in court, she is shamed for even her age. Like, what were you waiting for? There was a time a judge asked that from her. And for her, between us women, she said, it's because of my daughter. I don't want my daughter to go through what I went through. I want to be in a good place to tell her to refuse, to resist. Backlogs increase vulnerability of women. They become more vulnerable to exploitation and abuse while they are waiting for justice. When it comes to custody, the uncertainty and stress that backlogs can cause, prolonged, you can even lose your mind. Sometimes these people go to police, and the man, because he has the resources again, seizes the babies. And by the time we go through the process, even the baby does not remember the mother. The risk of trafficking. I've had cases where a man will come and more like kidnap his own child from this woman he had a baby with and take that person to the village where he comes from. The stress of a mother having to hound for their own child. If they decide to go through the court system, it takes years for them to recover their children. So this doesn't only impact on the women, but it also impacts on the children and their best interests. So I don't know if I'm talking too much or outside even the time you have allotted to me, but the impact.
We hope our listeners will also appreciate the plight of women in accessing justice all over the country. The examples you give are very important, and what comes to mind for me is the cases that you've been maybe supporting some of the people who have come to you for support. And I'd like to understand from your perspective and your experience, do you think the different ways that the judiciary has employed, which are things like plea bargaining, encouraging things like plea bargaining, ADR, maybe increasing the number of judges all over the country, have these approaches maybe improved the access to justice for women? Or will those approaches, which the judiciary continues to encourage, because I think recently the judiciary emphasized the need for ADR, and I'm sure plea bargaining is something that's highly encouraged. We have so many funders coming into the country and trying to support women in these unique positions. Do you think those things, though they haven't just begun now, they've been done over time, do you think they present any unique solution to maybe reduce the challenges that the women are facing in the next 10 years? Do we expect to see any big change, or do we need a completely different approach from your experience? I would like to hear your opinion on that.
I'd like to say yes and no, because just saying ADR, there must be someone that is actually doing the ADR. It's always not the initiative of the victims to introduce ADR discussions. I have been involved in the criminal section And usually it's until someone provided protocol or a services that is able to come and say, I'll handle maybe 10 cases. You have lawyers on watching brief, but in most cases they are looking at how much can we clear so we can get paid. Sadly, I don't know if they are paid for how many cases they handle, but it seems that is the case.
Maybe 10 cases. You have lawyers on watching brief, but in most cases they are looking at how much can we clear so we can get paid. Sadly, I don't know if they are paid for how many cases they handle, but it seems that is the case. And unfortunately, many women, in my opinion, are misrepresented. And sometimes because they have laid so long in the system, they settle for less, or sometimes they'll just say, let me just accept to be condemned so that I can get out of this entire system. I know for a fact that even though these innovations have been introduced, sometimes even the implementers are not there, or the judicial officers in place are not equipped to handle this. And unfortunately, I have come across many judicial officers, even though our law is that you're innocent until proven guilty, most of them believe that you must be guilty until you prove yourself innocent. For someone on a criminal charge to be granted bail in our system lately, in practice, very difficult. And many times I'm going with all these bail applications because I come way ahead before criminal sessions are fixed. And the judges will say the criminal session is open. The practice is we do not grant bail during an existing criminal session. And I know for a fact that these judicial officers are not going to handle all these cases in a criminal session. So your client misses out on bail as a remedy, or
the number of women being incarcerated in our prisons more than double. In the past, the prisons would report 1,000 women. Now, on an annual basis, more than 3,000 women go through the prison system. Every year, if you are specific or if you care to look at the stats of Uganda prisons, which they actually put out on their website on a monthly basis, the number of women in prisons has more than doubled. And I have seen that most of the cases that women, most of their crimes are really petty crimes, petty theft. They steal food from the market to feed their children, or bar brawls, they fought in a bar. These people in the slum quarreling back and forth. I have done cases around Kiriandongo and Nakasongola. More than 80% of the 2 million refugees flocking into our country are women and children. Most of those women find themselves in prisons. In Kiriandongo prison last year, I did some pro bono work there with my team. We found that most of the women in prison had been incarcerated for the offense of wandering about. I've never heard of such an offense in life post-COVID. Wandering about, and most of them had served 1 to 2 years. I can't even say served because some of them had not been tried. And the offense is wandering about. Some of them are refugees who cannot even speak languages, Ugandan languages, so communications was too difficult. And the judicial officers were telling me it's difficult to understand what they are saying, so you just send them back to prison. I keep telling my friends that when we found a translator, we were able to mediate between the bench and the prisoners, and by the end of the month we had cleared the women's prison in Kiriandongo. Because of the language barrier, they were stuck in the system. And I don't know, when we are in the courts in the central, there's someone interpreting in Uganda, and I know that even here in Kampala I've had challenges in KCCA court when they bring all these women from Karamoja, they bring them to the court, and then the person interpreting is speaking Luganda. These women speak Rujong. I don't know what the languages are spoken in Karamoja, but they are speaking languages from Karamoja, but the interpreter is interpreting in Uganda. And these women, when in the dock, they are just nodding. Even the prison orders cannot interpret for them what is happening. Can you therefore say that justice is going to be served? The women on the street end up in prison for begging. No, it's a crime to beg according to these Kampala ordinances. So they are arrested day in and day out. And for me, this is something we have challenged as in my office as being a very gender-specific crime. It seems to be targeting the women and the children begging. The fathers and the husbands of these women never show up, and no one is arresting them for allowing their children to be on the street. You know, so ADR will work if we put in place an ecosystem that favors it. It cannot work in isolation. It seems to work for those that are privileged enough to have representation. You know, we do not have a public legal aid program yet, and I'm happy to be informed because I see so many lawyers on the call right now on how that could work. But I think, especially women who are vulnerable, because I know that more than 80% that you'll find in prisons, or many of those that have been sued cannot afford representation. So they cannot participate in substantive ADR, for lack of a better word. But I know that SGBV say like gender-specific courts. It's an innovation from the bench that, in my opinion, has helped resolve many cases, and it has worked. It's something that needs to be studied some more and funded some more. But again, because of, I don't want to say lack of resources, because Uganda has a lot of money, really priority, especially for women issues, is a big challenge for us. I'll stop there and push it over to you to make sense of what I just said. Thank you.
But I'm shifting back. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Prima. I think now I'll shift back the question a bit to back to private legal practice, and this one I'll address it to Councillor Linda. And I understand, Councillor Linda, you're partner at a law firm. You have practiced law for almost for above a decade. Even went for in-house counsel and still came back private legal practice. And you have female colleagues who own law firms. So at this point, I would like to understand from your view, how does the issue of case backlog affect women-led law firms and their clients, and what solutions could be employed to solve that issue?
Thank you. I just want to speak about one of the innovations that has been championed over the last few years, plea bargaining, just as a rider on what Prima was explaining to us. I think that one of the challenges we have is that when we import strategies from other jurisdictions, we don't align our domestic legal framework to some of the unique aspects of those foreign jurisdictions that make that those solutions remain fair. And plea bargaining is one of those. We got this from the United States, where there is a time limitations within which prosecutors must try or charge people with certain criminal offenses. We brought it to our case backlog infected jurisdiction, where you can even serve the full sentence of what you would have been handed should you be convicted on remand before your case ever gets heard. And what that has ended up doing is it has given people no alternative but to accept convictions that they have no business accepting if the system was fair, because it's the only way out. To the extent that as a private practitioner, when I go down to plea bargaining camps to help suspects and accused people with their negotiation of those plea bargaining agreements, that the general sense you get is that, you know, you're being done a favor to be given this chance to confess and take a conviction. And it is almost unheard of to dispute whatever you're being handed, because should you not take it, let's say you're there for something that would have given you 3 years, you've probably already been there a whole year. So the fact that we don't have a time limitation within which prosecutions must happen allows case backlog to really be abused, even when we have innovations like plea bargain. Because now you don't have a choice, really. You either accept the plea negotiation or you're stranded in prison for a much longer period. It's a ransom for your freedom. Can you imagine how unfair it ends up being? The very tool that is supposed to correct an injustice is perpetrating it deeper. And I don't know whether practitioners have, and you know, many times when we private practitioners go into these spaces, it always feels as though we are intruding or interfering with an already prearranged arrangement between the bench and the prosecutors, and we are wiseacring and misleading the accused people about things that should otherwise be standard procedure. But when you think about what that conviction does for that person's whole life, and now they are being forced to exchange it for their freedom, I don't know. It just becomes very unfair. So coming to your question about female colleagues and how we are interacting with case backlog, I'll tell you that the terrain is already slanted when we go into negotiation rooms for work. Male clients will expect that a female lawyer should take the case at half the price they would have paid Ellison. If I and Ellison were bargaining for the same work, Ellison will drop a figure that is probably double what the scale provides for. No one will argue with that. I will have to defend and justify and have some add-ons if it is a retainer. So when now you are faced with something like case backlog, already there is that impression almost that it is because you gave the case to a woman. Why we told you these things are better handled by men. So case backlog multiplies and amplifies the biases, the unconscious biases and stereotypes that exist about women in litigation. And that's why I told you at the beginning that, so for many of us, I know many female led law firms, they'll give me a call and say, Linda, because if you still do litigation, how do you handle, For many of them, litigation is dead business that they will do if it involves family or if it involves that one client that they cannot lose because he now has to go through a divorce when he's the one paying a huge retainer in a commercial side of the business. So you find that now when it comes to the actual practice, let me tell you, many times, let's say your litigation, let's say you get pregnant when you really had counted on this case being settled by a certain date. And then now you have to end up on maternity leave. By the way, you people, these things are real. They are real. Because now I have to choose between breastfeeding my twins and showing up to court with breast pads that might leak. I've had really horrible stories about how judges treat women. The judicial discourtesy that male judges, even female judges, extend to female practitioners that are going through their motherhood challenges. I had a story once of a female practitioner. You sit in court, you anticipate that if your case is scheduled for 9, you anticipate that it's going to be called at maybe worst case scenario 11. But you find yourself there at midday, at 1. Do you know what happens when I have been breastfeeding twins and I step out from my role to come to a courtroom where I was hoping that I would get out in 3 hours? There is no blouse that I could wear that will control that flow of nature. It will be like this morning's flood, And there I am seated. And then, of all the things that the judge can take issue with, he decides to say, why is your blouse stained? No. Yes. I've had stories about, so I carried twins. And when I carried twins, my belly was so big, it would enter a room for about 2 minutes before you saw my face. Okay. Like it was that... like someone is entering, then find out, oh, it's you, Alinda. Now, of course, most of my dresses would not fit by the time some of the cases finally come to being heard. Now imagine, in addition to all my other troubles that morning, I must find a black dress. And I've been in court and watched a female judge dress down a female practitioner for wearing a maternity dress that was probably not black or white. And you're thinking to yourself, do you have any idea that when I first filed this case, it should have ended before I even got married? But here I am, 5 years later. I can't amplify or explain to you how much, for your own dignity, sanctity, mental health, and so many other levels, women practitioners are shunning or having to avoid litigation because of case backlog, because of the uncertainty that comes into our already uncertain worlds as a result of backlog.
Linda, just on that exact point, I think you raise a very interesting... Sorry about that. I think you raise a very interesting point, which I think most young lawyers of a similar age group, I won't say like myself, but most young lawyers are thinking thinking of, you're making career decisions. Do you want to go down the path of maybe a heavy litigation? Do you want to go into an in-house counsel role? Do you want to stay and do maybe corporate advisory and whatnot? And one of the assessments you make, because at the end of your career as a lawyer, you'd want to have a level of specialty, you'd like to have a level of competence, you'd want to have some flight hours in court. For instance, you want to be able to say you've had this number of judgments and rulings and you've made these precedents and all these wonderful things, but the numbers don't look good on you, Lee. They don't look good when you walk into courts as well. I want to understand from your perspective, and I think you've already made the point clear in terms of the challenges that women experience in being able to just be present in court and represent their clients. Do you think that case backlog in the way it stands right now affects the ability of young lawyers to achieve specialty, competence, a good number of flight hours over time? And do you think that the approaches that exist at the judiciary right now are supporting young lawyers in any way? But more importantly, I want you to help us understand what other creative ways we can, what other things we can implement right now to support young female lawyers in particular, because I think this issue uniquely affects young female lawyers because the numbers don't lie. Thank you.
And that it's a lot easier. By and large, it's a lot easier to amplify the problems than it is to suggest the solutions. But I told you earlier that I left private practice when I had been there 3 years, and I went into in-house counsel role. And I was at that time in my first trimester of my second daughter, and there was just no way I was going to find myself in, the life of a young female lawyer. You walk into office in the morning having your day planned out, maybe to do the pleadings in the cases that you have, and then you overhear your boss telling the client in Luweero that I won't make it. This is probably like at 7 a.m. I won't make it. I'm sending a young lawyer called Linda. And there, your day, and that's the reality. As a litigation lawyer, you have to be prepared to be agile and flexible and swing whichever direction you have to swing, Now, I think that the challenges that I think I can't sugarcoat it for a young lawyer, a young female lawyer. I really can't. What I think though is that you have to allow yourself the grace. Like I said earlier, your clock is still ticking. Case backlog, nonetheless, your clock is still ticking. You have to allow yourself the grace to step away sometimes and concentrate on what is important. You can always come back to litigation. By the way, litigation is a lot more fun when you're a lot older, a lot more mature, a lot more able to bully the men as well, a lot more able to hold your ground, a lot more able to realize that a high-heeled shoe is not the most important thing you need on a court date for your confidence. Maybe some preparation instead. But these are things that if you say to a young lawyer, they'll think that you're just trying to project your old miserable life on them and your poor knees that can no longer wear high heels. So these are not things that a young lawyer will want to hear early. But in terms of how do we support young women, I think that as the time has come, we've attracted so many young women into this falsely glamorous life, because what we project in the courtroom vis-a-vis what it takes to keep that act are two different worlds that we are not honest about, even as female lawyers. Of course, the men are not honest at any level, that one we are used to. But even as female lawyers, we are not honest about what it takes, the toll it takes. And like I said to you, I came from a family where I had watched two previous generations suffer that false appearance toll, and I was alive to the reality of why I must choose family sometimes and not apologize for it at any level. So I will be in court, and if it is time to pick my children, I will seek the adjournment. I don't care if opposite counsel gives me a side eye. I don't care if the judge laughs at me. For me, school pickup is the biggest time that I have with my daughters every day. And I'm not going to negotiate that because their lives are not standing still. So I think that as a bar, we need to think about how to support women, especially young women. I've been saying to my fellow female partners in law firms, can't we pool resources and, for example, have medical insurance that targets particularly childbearing aspects, so that we can be able to make sure that every law firm, from the synergy of our combined effort, can afford to have all the ladies, because there's nothing more humiliating than for me having to submit my medical bills of my private issue to the accountant to get a refund or whatever other arrangements we currently try to maintain that exposes women and our privacy issues. I remember I remember very well during my childbearing years. I remember being late for court, for example, on a day when I had, let's say, reproductive medical issue. And I remember one time my case was dismissed because I couldn't get to Mengo in time. And I swore an affidavit. I applied for reinstatement. And I had to be honest about what had happened, And then I became the template in the firm. When the male lawyers wanted their cases to be reinstated, they'd say, doesn't Linda have one of her medical affidavits? Can't she help us and get this? Because as soon as you would say, I had a reproductive, everyone will just want, granted, consent, counsel, can't you consent to this? Must I hear all this? Somehow, suddenly when we are really in trouble, the men are willing to give us whatever we are asking for. But must it take manipulation? Can't we? Honestly, we are more than 5,000 now. And women, I've been looking at the numbers, for example, in our female law firms. The women support team, the women advocates are the majority. We are employing, when you think about the back ends of most law firms, by the way, a good number of them is women. At the front here, you will see the male lawyers as the partners, but in the kitchen there, the majority of them are women. The ones who are churning out the pleadings, the ones who are churning out the submissions, the legal opinions, most of them are women, because we are the ones that want to have a desk job where no one is going to throw me to Ruero in the middle of my day, So can't we start thinking about sustainable ways to support women as they go through these different challenges? Things like medical insurance for women, things like flexible financial services for the different packages that women need, making sure that, since we know that practice is really steeped against them, how are we going out of our way to support them better?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Linda. You see, I understand you have taught at all this for a decade, and this means you have trained a lot of litigation lawyers, and it's your wish that they have an amazing career in litigation. However, you have noted that speed. Okay, let me see. Let's get back the conversation to Council Prima. From your experience, you experienced a lot of gender-sensitive cases, and you handle quite a lot of them. And this really have an emotional trial on both the women lawyers and even the litigants themselves and even the lawyers handling. So I'd like us to share with us your experience how case backlog affects the gender-sensitive cases, especially on land and family disputes, and what solution could you usually put in place to solve these challenges. Thank you.
I don't know if Prima you had, I think you're muted.
I'm not sure I understood the question. There was I couldn't hear the person clearly. I just heard challenges and what are the solutions, but I don't know if he's talking in respect of the backlog or.
Yes, I think if I understood him, he's saying how the backlog affects gender-sensitive cases, and you had talked about land, but also about sexual and gender-based violence and family disputes. How can you, if you look at you had touched on this previously, but if you really pick out, because I think Linda has focused on really the life of the practitioner, but what about the life of the client, that female client? I think maybe Mercy can build up on that as well.
And yes, Prima, maybe just in addition to that, you mentioned the number of people, the number of ladies who are in the prisons. I'd like to also understand, because access to justice means access to representation as well for some instances, because few of these women know their rights and how they should present themselves in court. And if someone has to maintain a lawyer for about maybe 5 years, is that even feasible? In your experience, is that a feasible is that something that even happens? Because I know even like there are lifetimes for projects. If a project has to help represent a lady for about 5 years, is that something they even sustain? So access to justice through access to representation is, in your experience, is that something that the women in prisons have access to, and the women that you interact with? And I think the other thing that my colleague was trying to bring was, what alternatives or approaches do you think need to be employed in order to act particular issues that are being faced? Alternatives or approaches do you think need to be employed in order to address these particular issues that are being faced?
Okay. I believe really we have expounded on some of the effects or challenges of backlog on women. And I mentioned the delayed justice for cases taking long, the emotional stress, helplessness that comes with having to wait forever to achieve justice, sometimes even being forced into plea bargains or pleas of guilty when one need not have that. But maybe I should focus more on what needs to be done. I think it's important. I have mentioned that more than 3,000 women lately go through the prison system on an annual basis. That is an increase of, an increasing rate of more than 40%, alarming compared to the male incarceration rates in our country, which should be a cause for concern, because if you think about it, even from a gender very biased position, our prison systems or judicial systems were not created to target or accommodate women. You'll find more prisons were built for men. So there's very few facilities for women, and that comes with challenges of their own. Linda mentioned from a practitioner's perspective how even the courts are not, the institutions are not framed to accommodate us in the practice. It seems like the practice is a male-dominated society. So if I am pregnant, I'm lactating, and I need to breastfeed, the dress code need to change. And, judicial officers should be able to accommodate that. And personally, I've had also an experience like Linda. 2 years ago, I was also pregnant at some point. And in my case, I wrote to the court to adjourn the case because I was on maternity leave. In fact, that day was the day I gave birth. And counsel asked for costs because I think he said that you cannot seek an adjournment through a letter or something like that. And the judge gave a ruling that he will consider the costs in the main cause. Unfortunately for him, that judge has been transferred, and now we are in a different case, and my daughter is now 2 years old. Funny, but it happens for the women as well. And I was thinking, I'm going to be punished for going to give birth. I was waiting for that decision so I can take the judge on personally. I was like, I'll go and see him in chambers, but also publicly in my activism, use him as a case study. I think, lucky for him, my case is going to have to go through a whole retrial, and I don't know what co-counsel is going to be doing in the new trial. But for gender-specific cases, it's important, and I think it requires more resources, funding, to address the backlog. When it comes to SGBV cases, sexual violence cases which concern women, families are at stake. When women come and they are pushed into the system for long, children are left without mothers. As women, we are caregivers. You might be a lawyer doing your 8 to 5 or 8 to 5 job, but as soon as you close your 5 job, you then start a 6 to midnight caregiving role. You open a new chapter, and Linda has already explained that as soon as she's closing arguments at 4 p.m., she is running to pick kids. She has to make dinner, put them to bed, help them with homework, care for the husband. And that's unpaid care work, or something that we do not consider in the practice. Causes a whole toll on the person providing the legal services as well. But even for the people, the clients in the system, when they are in the system and their cases are not being handled, the psychological torture. And I know most of the plea I get from my women is, Prima, my children are not going to school. Prima, who is bathing my children while I'm in prison? Prima, it's been, even if it's just a month, my children are getting lost. My children might get married. The rate at which girls get pregnant in the absence of their mothers in this country is alarming. This entire week I've been telling people that Uganda has the youngest population on the globe. According to our statistics, UBOS reported last year, more than 50% of our population is under the age of 17. So imagine you end up in prison as a mother. If you're above 17 years of age, you're the 40% of this country. And that means we have lost a whole generation of people. Just 1 or 2 months away from your children, you have lost them. They run to the world to care for them. And this is something that the prisons or the judiciary is not looking at. Recently I had a very good dialogue with, I think it was Justice Wolayo in Luwero. I have mentioned working in Nakasongola. I found women with cases of up to 4 years that have never seen a day in court. And I wrote to the court but did not follow up in December. Like he mentioned, I did not have the resources to go back to Nakasongola. It's easier to work around Kampala and get funding for cases around Kampala. So I had written to the court to consider having a session for the women's prison. And when I went there in February to check on the cases we had put to the attention of the court, all the cases had been resolved. And I was told by the clerks that the judge held a women's session specifically for the women in Nakasongola prison. and all the cases had been disposed of. And I sent Justice Wolayo a message to say I was pleasantly surprised. I had not seen this happening in any court anywhere. And for her, she told me that I had a gender-specific training that informed us of the statistics of women in prison and that these are petty cases. And indeed, when I looked at the cases that you had presented for your women in the paperwork before us, I noticed that indeed they were petty cases that I could dispose of with, community sentences for those that she found guilty. I know I had women that even had mental health challenges. There was one that had killed her child while she was schizophrenic. She told me that she had voices telling her to kill the child. And she squeezed the kid's neck until it fell dead. And then I think the demons left her. And she confessed this in the court. And the medical people had confirmed and written to the prison authorities that this lady is schizophrenic. And that lady was in prison, I think, for 2 years. And when I looked at her file, the judge had sent her to hospital. He had released her and said, go and get medication. I said, so why did we have to keep her for so long and, clog the system for everyone else that needed a chance in court, if otherwise, so maybe trainings could be a solution. More funding to ensure, the specific, I mentioned SGBV court sessions, but I know that prosecutors and the bench usually says we need special funding for these. Yes, again, prioritizing funding towards these reported cases. But when it comes to land issues, I think it is also important for judges to be taken through trainings of the gender-specific clauses when it comes to property rights. And this person is only coming to, claim an estate, by association. I'm from this family. These are my brothers. And even though this is our culture, I'm a constitutional human being that is recognized under the law. So if property is being divided, so must even I should receive something like this. So beyond just what we know and the norms and the culture, and when we come to the bench, we come as a people, but we also come with our cultural knowledge and all of that. So it's important that those are brought to the attention of judges or people at the bench, because in most cases they are not nuances that are obvious to them when they are adjudicating these cases. I will leave it at that and hand it over to you.
However, you noted that so many female lawyers have read litigation and most of them have given up on litigation to pursue other careers. So do you think that we risk losing future women litigators to this current system where it is becoming hard to access justice in courts? And then how can mentorship and legal training be structured to prepare young women lawyers for a system hampered by chronic delays and case backlog in courts? Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred.
How can mentorship be structured?
I think that we have to be alive to the different cautious biases and stereotypes that affect women when we go to train them. I'll tell you that the reason I have not given up on my teaching career yet, I will soon give up, but one of the reasons why I keep teaching is because I don't want to create the impression for young female law students that only men can litigate, that only men can hold their own or practice the things that we teach. And I can tell you that over the years, particularly when I headed the teaching of trial advocacy at the Law Development Center, I saw female lawyers, female students really excel at trial advocacy. I think that for all the 4 years I headed that subject, all the best female lawyers, all the best students in trial advocacy were female. And I don't think that that was just by chance. I think that female students envision themselves succeeding in something when they see you model it. And I say to female practitioners all the time. Every time you don't teach, every time you don't participate in these skilling programs, you unconsciously send a message to female law students that they can't do this, that they have to be a man in order to succeed at this. And then the second part is that, so as when I teach, for example, I know that even when a female student has a correct answer, they're going to be sitting there, imposter syndrome themselves, second guessing themselves, while the male student who has the wrong answer is going to be shooting his hand up and insisting that he should be picked. So I insist, I call them out, and I think that every teacher must go into the classroom alive to those stereotypes, so that you peel those layers off as you train them, so that you insist to them. I tell female lawyers all the time, yes, of course you're going to be nervous, that's normal. Don't expect that, your voice is not going to disappear for the first sentence that you had planned. So don't leave the first sentence to chance. And I think that when you train female lawyers, when you train law students to be self-aware about their sort of gender-based disadvantages, you empower them to address them and to prepare. They say women have to work or have to be twice as good to get half the respect or and whatever cooperation they need from the court or from opposite counsel. So for us, particularly as women, we don't have as much patience from the court, for example, when we are cross-examining. A man can cross-examine on nonsense for about 30 minutes, and the judge will probably be enjoying the depth of his voice and will not stop him. While for you, on your fifth question, if you're not going anywhere, the judge is already looking at his watch and, giving you this eye of where is this going. You have to be alive to that when you skill yourself. And for me, I have found it a blessing, because half the time, if I'm against someone that does not know me, they're going to underestimate me. And that's what I need them to be doing when I go up against them. So rather than pity ourselves and feel sorry for ourselves and, whine about how all these things are steeped against us, I think that you can actually take it in stride and make sure that you take the very thing that should be holding you back and you use it to anchor yourself and to spring yourself forward. So I think that particularly for training programs, I'll tell you that the reason that we've been running the trial advocacy training program with the ULS for the last 17 years, I think this year, since 2009, is particularly for that, because there is something about male upbringing that makes them more successful as litigators, because litigation is a fight. It's an adversarial system that steeps you up to fight an opponent, and men are prepared for that all their lives. On the other hand, we are prepared to be graceful, to concede, to defer to. So you must really restructure that. I've had to be tough, be out of my character when I know that I'm dealing with a bully, because I am aware that right now this judge I'm dealing with is a bully, and that has nothing to do with me. It's not my hairstyle, it's not the color of my shoe, and all those things that society will almost indirectly blame us for. When you are skilled to see through those lenses, they won't throw you off your goal. But thinking about how we make workplaces and courts more alive and more supportive for us as female litigators, I think Prima already talked about some of the things, things like programs, practical programs that support us when we're going through the motherhood curve. One of the things that really breaks my heart is that female lawyers, the law as a profession attracts some of the strongest women to it. Because, you have to have some level of insanity as a woman to choose law as a choice of course. But it also takes us away from raising other generations of similarly strong women, because it forces us to abandon our motherhood challenges to nannies, to maids, to all kinds of people, all kinds of support structures, because of the whole mentality that, everything is urgent, so there's this deadline, you can't, So what is ending up happening is that we carry the burden much later in our careers, when now our children should be independent, should be out there killing it like we killed it when we were young. We end up with children that were not raised. We don't give a piece of ourselves, a piece of our strength because of these structured differences. And for me, as a woman, I'm always alive to that. I know that if I don't raise my children now, I'm going to be cleaning up messes later. And I don't want that. And I don't want anyone. I don't want any woman to be under the false impression of paying such a high price for it. So things like lactating rooms, things like nurseries. I have pictures of my kids waiting in courtrooms when I end up in court if I have to pick them up. And they know that they think it's indefinite. They know that they have to go to the secretary if they need something. And women don't have that courage to do crazy things like that. Even things like what I spoke about earlier. Health insurance for particularly maternity issues. That should be non-negotiable. And then when you think about things like flexible performance measures, you know, a man can be measured by his presence in the office. Not even just how he's dressed, but the fact that he leaves at 8 p.m. and comes by 6 a.m. Why should that be my measure also? Am I also idle at home? Do I also have nothing to do for my family like he does? And yet, for most of our law firms, that's the measure, you know? Yeah, but he's always here, so that's why we're giving him the big files. What do you mean? Why don't you instead give me a goal? Why don't you page my performance to specific results instead of how many people can stay in the bar with the boss, how many can tell the boss good stories late into the evening? I don't have time for that. And I shouldn't have to have time for that in order for me to progress further into my career. And then structures around the vices in our profession. Sexual harassment is a big issue. And I don't think that we do enough as law firms to address it. We have a no sexual harassment policy at AMBA. For us, the work environment must be as positive as it can be. And our staff members know that whether it is a clerk who hits on them or a client or opposite counsel, they know that they can tell me and they know that I will go and address that issue immediately. And so many times when I have had to rein in, for example, clerks, they know my girls. They'll say, but how many of us go out of our way to provide that kind of comfort and support for our girls, well knowing that these are things they face every day going through our court system? And especially since it's backlog that we're talking about, the whole sense of that when I start a case, I'm going to be stuck with this clerk who is probably, you know, finding every moment to comment about whichever part of my body pleases or displeases him for 5 years. That becomes the thing about efficiency is that when things work well for women, when things work well for everyone, women benefit. When they don't work well, women suffer more. So I think that addressing those things doesn't have to be gender sensitive for it to have a gender benefit for us as women.
Thank you so much, Linda, for that. I had promised to end this space early, but I don't want us to end it without. I'd promised Prima actually to end this space early, but I don't want to end it without us going to one of the issues which I wanted us to discuss. And after everything I've heard about how men are doing nothing at home, they can be in office at 8, and how Linda's children know that they sit in court and therefore they understand things like res judicata and points of law, and also about how Prima has to pay some costs for giving birth. After all of that, I think it is important nonetheless to move to one other issue, if you don't mind. Just one other issue, and then we start closing the conversation. On these judicial service conversations, I'm going to start with Prima. On these judicial service conversations, we've been talking for the last few weeks about backlog generally. And we've been talking about backlog in the sense that it's stifling the economy, it's affecting land. Now we are hearing how it's breaking down into real cases. And we've Clause 2 of the Constitution. It provides that Article 142 Clause 2C of the Constitution provides that where the Chief Justice shall inform the Judicial Service Commission where the state of the business of the court so requires, the President, on the advice of the Judicial Service Commission, can appoint judicial officers to get in and help solve the problem. We have a huge problem of backlog. Just imagine that 70-year-old woman, Prima, that you were telling us about. That 70-year-old woman looking for justice in a divorce case because she has been beaten for 50 years of her life. And our question is, wouldn't this idea of mission-based judges, wouldn't it benefit people? First of all, I think a lot of women can be mission-based judges, and I think the two of you, for example, would bring a fantastic perspective to the judiciary. I mean, I'm here embarrassed to have a conversation at 8:43 because I've been told that men are doing nothing at home. So maybe I'll start with you, Prima. If you could just... So our argument has been, we need to have a mission-focused judiciary. We can't continue to have the sort of backlog where the whole of Chiriandongo is full of prisoners because of an interpretation issue, because of lack of a judicial officer, because of people being charged with the offense of wandering that you've just told us about. So how our contention has always been mission-based judges, and what the role women can play as mission-based judges. And maybe, Prima, you could go ahead with this. I promise you we're winding up very soon.
No, I told you that we
The role women can play as mission-based.
So it's dinner time and
You could
children
go
want to eat with us and help
I promise
them
you we're
go
winding.
to bed. So even as we speak, national
Yeah.
issues.
I told you that we play care roles, so it's dinner time and children want to eat with us and help them go to bed. So even as we speak, national issues and contribute to the narrative, we need to have that at the back of our mind. Maybe even in organizing the space and the time frames we choose when to have. It's a good time, give and say, but are women on the
Actually, if I can
platform?
interrupt you, statistically speaking, whereas there may be more men now,
it's what
we are
Linda
having
is
the
saying,
largest
they
number
have
of women
nothing
that
to
we have
do.
had
They are not
before.
having dinner,
And we can,
them to
and I
do
see a
homework
bigger
or say
frame
their
of numbers
prayers
as the
and they
host
go
from
to
here.
bed.
I can tell you that.
Actually, if I can
I mean, you also have the white pictures.
Statistically speaking,
Whereas there may be more men now, we are having the largest number of women that we have had before, and we can, and I see a bigger frame of numbers as the host from here. I can tell you that, and many
I
men
think
also have
because
the
we
white
have
pictures.
women as speakers today, they've come to support us.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that, though. I think mission-based judges or judicial systems would be really good in helping us manage the backlog. I have seen the Chief Justice, even in the new lawyer, decrying this as, overly. I think one of his biggest achievements, he says, is being able to recruit more judges to manage this, but it's still a challenge. I have worked in Gulu, and there was a time when the person who was head at Gulu was also in charge of, I think, Kitgum and the Lamu region at some point. Now I know that there is a high court in Lira, but you get to his chambers, just look at the files, he will be like, I was in Kitgum, and you see that backlog I have to look at, and there is you coming from Kampala, and sometimes when we are coming from Kampala, you're going to court, we appear in that. The judge will say, I'll start with lawyers coming from so far, while going with those that stay around. And you go to demand for your judgment from a judge. Just look at the files. They are going up to the roof, and you just walk out because you feel for sure that maybe your case is not even the most urgent case they should handle. But if we had mission-based judges or systems or courts, I think it would help manage the backlog and reduce on the number of cases that have to be handled by one judge in a whole region, say, where more than 5,000. I know I have also done some work in Bushenyi and in Barara, that side, and I think 2 years ago, Bushenyi had the highest number of prisoners on pre-trial detention. They just need the judge to be there, schedule sessions for them, and I know they've been making these appointments lately. You could say merit-based, but on trial. Are we calling it trial, Elson? You can correct me. They are,
Mission-based, but anything you want to call it. Feel free.
yeah, they are not sure. So you don't know. The judges want to act on tension, more like performance-based. If they don't perform, then they might not be confirmed, which I think could also affect access to justice as a con on the other side. It might help increase efficiency, manage the caseload, maybe even accountability, and say, hey, we had 1,000 cases, now we have 200. I have been able to manage this in this criminal session and all of this, and for me, I think that is a good thing, something we should invest more in, because I also believe it will help improve on case management, because there is quite a number of judicial officers that will be able to handle. And I think a good example is Mukono High Court. It used to be notorious for backlog of cases, but lately Mukono, I think, has 3 judges on site, and they still have a lot on their desk, but too much has been handled and a lot has been churned out of the system, which I think is a good thing. We can bring on board more seasoned lawyers. There's too many lawyers that would even be willing to volunteer time on the bench, but that is not present or not being used. So I think that is a good option that we can explore. It might help many women. My ladies who have been in prison for so long waiting for trial, or these people that are waiting to get their divorce. Unfortunately, there's even cultural issues that have, that affect the dispensation of justice. But I think if we have quite a number of people that we can opt to go to and forums to seek audience, it makes it easy to access justice. That's what I think about that.
Ellison.
Over to you.
So
thank you.
When I think about how urgent so many of, or the sense of urgency with which litigation is approached, and the sacrifice we are often forced to pay. For example, pleadings are time bound. Preparing for trial is time bound. You've been in court when the judge gives you 3 days to file submissions, when you know that the judgment will not come for another 3 months. And I want to ask, can we have the same? If you're giving me just a week, when I know that this judgment is not going to come for another 6 months, why is the urgency on our side? I think that we have normalized case backlog. We have gotten used to case backlog. I remember the first time I was shocked by case backlog was that incident I told you about when we were thrown out of the home we grew up in. After we got the interim orders and were now settled back in and needed the suit to proceed to trial, for me and my mom, who were new to the whole system, 2 years before the thing is heard was a long time. So we went to seek audience with the judge who was hearing the case. And we told him we are worried. It's been 2 years. And then he said, 2 years? Your case is still very young. It is still... And indeed, let me tell you guys, you know what I ended up doing for that case? We filed it in 2007. 10 years later, it had still not taken off. This was in the land division. The guy who threw us out of the house had died. The lawyer who helped him throw us out had died. The people from whom the house had been fraudulently repossessed had, of course, died, were deceased. My own dad was dead. And I remember sitting in court that morning when the case was called, and still the defendants were not in court. And I looked at these pleadings and I realized that my mom was the only alive person on the face of the record. Only me and my mom was still alive from when that case had started. And you know what I did? I sat and watched the case be buried. The case was called. The judge asked the clerk to go outside and also call. I sat there just looking. I had just made up my mind, let this case be dismissed and we accept that we lost the home we grew up in. I shall find whatever money my mom wanted from this case from my personal sweat, and I shall compensate her. Because in that moment, I thought to myself, we are the only ones who have life. And yet we are here 10 years later, still fighting with all these deceased people. And my mom has never forgiven me. She still reminds me to this date that I withdrew her case. I allowed her case to be dismissed without her consent. Because for me, in that duality of being both counsel and litigator, I was honestly fed up. So why have we normalized case backlog? For me, that normality is what makes us look at the solutions such as the one in Article 142E as out of this world and strange and too much. If we really considered case backlog to be as abnormal as it truly is, the innovation of a solution like this would be an absolute no-brainer. It would be like, of course, we must. Because for sure, the business of the court demands it. And when you think about, for example, I know so many fine practitioners that will never apply to be judge, that are never interested in being judge. And listening to the last space you had, and I know many South Africans, and I've had the opportunity of training across Africa. And I know that in Southern Africa, both Botswana and South Africa, they have these acting judges. I have friends of mine, litigators, when it's their turn to be an acting judge, we all know that we can't contact them. We know that they're out of the office. We know that they've signed up to help the court in this particular period, and we must all accord them the space and whatever they need to fulfill it. So I think, for example, if I had, let's say, all the fine lawyers that I can think about, if I was to think about someone like maybe Peter Waruviri, who of us would not want Peter Waruviri to decide our land cases if they were stuck there? I mean, and so there is always the option to appeal against whatever. It's not like it's a dead end that if you're dissatisfied with the decision, you have no way out. No. But at some point, we must get mad enough and dissatisfied enough with the state of affairs to be innovative about the solutions. And if the Constitution envisaged this way back in 1995, then why is it taking that long for us to consider the option?
Okay, fantastic. I think the case has been made more eloquently than I ever could. Tonight, I think I don't want to take any more time. People have dinner to have and people to put to bed, and people don't have nothing to do at night. But tonight, I think it's fair to say we've had some hard truths. We've had about injustice, and we've had some powerful solutions. We have had testimonies. You know, I read somewhere that they overcame the enemy by the word of their testimony. And I think tonight we've had testimonies. Testimonies for generals at the front line of legal practice. Testimonies from giants of our profession. And we usually go around to say goodbye, but without going round to say goodbye, I think, and in the interest of time, allow me to thank you so much, Prima and Linda, for taking your evenings off and for coming here to share your experience and your thoughts with those of us who came to listen. And I can tell you, we have been challenged, we have been inspired, we have been blessed to sit here and listen. And we have also been humbled. For the justice system, it is becoming increasingly clear that we can no longer afford to wait. Justice is not an aspiration. It must not just be aspirational. It must become operational. We must understand that apart from hearing hard truths, it's time we got powerful solutions. We're not just going to lament, we need to act. And for me, I think the case for a serious root and branch review of our justice system, from the facilities that we have in our courts, to the use of technology in our hearings, to the deployment of more judicial officers, including mission-based judges, I think a serious rethink has to be thought about how justice is delivered as a service. And I am very humbled for this conversation. And maybe I can just give Prima and Linda just final words, and I will give the final words on behalf of my friends Mercy and Alfred. I'll start with you, Prima.
Thank you, Elson. It's really been an absolute honor for me to be on this space to share thoughts with you all. Thank you for the platform and the space to do this, and I hope that these conversations can lead to some meaningful interventions so we can end the impunity that is that perpetrated or perpetuated by the system against people we serve. I hope that this is the beginning of many more constructive dialogues to bridging the gender gap also in access to justice, because we cannot do it alone as women, but I don't think the male gender can proceed alone without us as well. We must be willing and able to accommodate one another, and sometimes we have to be very deliberate at this, and I want to thank you for deliberately pulling out or pushing us to be on this space to share this, because I can affirm that this is the time I'm interacting with my children as well, so I'm not always on the spaces. But because you called me out now, I'm like, oh, okay, wait, we must be here, and I had to be there, and I commit to making time to
with my children as well, so I'm not always on the spaces.
Thank you.
But because you called me out now, I'm like, oh, okay, wait, we must be here, and I had to be there, and I commit to making time
I join
to
voices with Prima
to try
say
to
thank you
listen in and
for getting
contribute
us out
more.
of our
Thank you.
bombolies, our motherhood
Thank
bombolies
you.
tonight. Like I said when we started, the bad luck of this indefinite campaign season has given us the blessing of introspect, to ponder and go beyond the mere rhetoric of campaign seasons and really think about the solutions to the challenges that our profession faces. The previous lawyers, the lawyers, when I think about the lawyers that came before us, they did so much to attract us to the profession, to model for us how successful we could be at this, to show us how justice could be delivered. And we can't be the generation that sits and whines and complains only, as we've gotten good at. These conversations really are a positive space in thinking about solutions, being the contribution we need to be to the bar. So thank you, Ellison, for having them, and good luck with the rest of this indefinite but wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody who has come in to listen to us. You've had it. We need to end impunity, bridge the gender gap. You've had it here. The blessing of the long campaign is the blessing of introspection. And of course, what we've been saying, Alfred likes likes the song very much. I'm sure you'll hear from him very soon. What we've been saying is nobody can stop reggae, and that is really what it is. This long campaign is reggae. Now, from me though, to everybody who has joined us, to everybody listening, from wherever you are, thank you for coming, thank you for listening, and from all of us to all of you, as we always say, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Reggae in the bad mood, reggae in the bad mood, reggae. church that they tried to kill it many years ago. In that presence of breaking, but somebody served to respect the Rastaman, 'cause he's the only one. Nobody can stop the game.